Introduce myself. My name is Sanjay Patel. I'm owner of WebFirst, and we're currently working with the AlzPED database and with some of the PubMed API work, and very happy to be here and honored to be here with you today. So we'll dive right in. All right, so introduction again, I just introduced myself. I'm the owner of WebFirst and the AlzPED project manager. We've also got Ted Gifford, our senior developer here as well, who's going to be leading the second half of the talk. And I want to introduce James King, the branch chief and information architect for the NIH library. So thank you for all of you for being here today. So a little bit about WebFirst. We're a web and mobile technology company. We're focused on federal agency and nonprofit clients. We've done quite a bit in the health IT space. We're also strong in Drupal, some of the open source systems, WordPress, and mobile technologies as well. And if you are following along, you can take notes on the Drupal GovCons HackPad, and there is the web address for HackPad. Okay, so first I'm going to talk a little bit about the AlzPED website. AlzPED stands for the Alzheimer's Disease Preclinical Efficacy Database. And the purpose of the database is to promote preclinical therapy development for Alzheimer's disease. It's really a knowledge platform to allow researchers to share and collaborate to find out what studies are out there that are specific to Alzheimer's research, in an effort to promote transparency, efficiency, and reproducibility. And so one of the things that's really exciting about this platform, this website, is that it really it includes both published and unpublished studies. So you would not find all of the studies on PubMed that you would on the AlzPED website. And so we've got good searching tools. It has its own taxonomy, and so I'll show a little bit about that. And we're looking at the September launch as the anticipated launch date. So a little bit more about the implementation details of AlzPED. We're using Drupal 7. We've got Apache Solr integration with the faceted API module. We're using Autocomplete and views integration as well. For the data entry side, where researchers will enter the study information, that will be done as a multi-step form for data entry. And then, of course, we've done some PubMed integration. So I'd like to just switch over for just a minute and show you the site, the dev site. Let's see if I can. So again, this is in beta, early beta release. And yeah,
wonder if Camtasia is interfering here.
Okay.
You have to change the monitor setting. All right, function.
Can I get into Camtasia now? Okay.
Let's see here. Is that this the one here? No, that's not doing it for me. Instructions. No.
So you had it set up with speakers.
Thank you. All right, so again, this is in beta. So again, we've only got test data and really very preliminary content on the website. But I'll show you some of the main parts of the site.
Just minimize this.
And the main part is sort of the basic search where you can do a keyword text search against all the studies in the database. We've also got more of an advanced search where you can search full text, the title of the paper, the article, funding organizations. We've got you can search by therapy type, therapeutic target, an agent, and of course there's model information as well. And so again, we've got some dummy data in here with some study information, and it's all done via faceted search. We've got facets where we can drill down by the different targets and model types, the various filters. We can drill down into a particular study and look at the study as well. You can tell here if it's published or unpublished work, the year of the publication. And then over here, we'll talk about this a little bit more further on, but this is the related citations in PubMed. So just to kind of give you a flavor of what the site looks like and really quick overview of the AlzPED website. Okay, so what is PubMed? You may have heard of PubMed. It's a biomedical literature database, obviously the largest medical literature database in the world. It has more than 24 million citations. It's run through the NCBI from the NLM. It has links to full text versions of the citations. It's a critically important tool for medical researchers and biomedical researchers. It has broad coverage of topics and publications, and it has very powerful search tools. You may have heard of a lot of the E-suite, the E-utilities that are part of PubMed, very powerful set of tools. It's the industry standard. It's used in many of the third-party tools. There's quite a bit of PubMed API integration with these tools. And as I mentioned, it's maintained by the NCBI, which is part of the National Library of Medicine. So how researchers use PubMed? Well, they find publications related to their research. So if they're looking for papers or studies to look at past evidence, to see if that research has already been conducted, they'll do searches using PubMed. And they'll import these results into the citation manager. Typically, they'll have some kind of desktop citation manager or some other software where they'll download the citations and upload them into their local software. Searches can use either mesh terms, which is the medical subject heading terms, or you can just use free text these days. So I believe in previous iterations, mesh was sort of more important. Now it's more of a Google style, type in your text and find the results. As you can see with Alzheimer's disease, we got about 18,000 results using mesh terms for Alzheimer's disease. And then using free text, we got 30,000. So definitely some differences there, and researchers can try them in different ways. Okay, so with that, I'm going to transition more to the more technical part. We're going to discuss more in depth about the PubMed API. And so for this part of the talk, I'd like to introduce Ted Gifford.
All right, yes. Can we get some Drupal with that? That's why we're here. So before we go on, I want to get a sense of the audience. Do we have researchers, Drupal developers? Who's a Drupal developer or site builder here? Okay, about half. Do we have researchers here? Also some, okay. And so the other categories of people are people that are interested in Drupal or the PubMed API. PubMed side, okay, PubMed side. And so you're familiar with PubMed then. Is anybody here not familiar with PubMed? We got one. Okay. Okay. So we've got the background on that. I will. Let's see here. I will try to explain any Drupalisms that I'm using. Then that seems like the most appropriate thing to do here. All right. So the I guess Entrez is how we pronounce that. The Entrez programming utilities are the API. And of course, when you're integrating systems, you usually use an API, which stands for Application Programming Interface. It allows two different computer systems to talk to each other. So for example, the Drupal site can talk to PubMed. And they're called the E-utilities, and they cover 38 databases, of which PubMed is one of. There's protein databases and genes and a whole bunch of other things. You can get to all of them through these 9 endpoints. So they're all, if you go look at the documentation, they're all E something, e-info, e-search, but I tend to just think of them as English terms. So the info gives you like the number of rows in each database, that sort of thing. The search utility is the main one, really. That's where you go to run a query. Just like as if you went to the PubMed site and typed in some text and hit search. The post utility is a way to work with groups of documents in one go. So it's a kind of like working with the Drupal batch API for Drupal developers, somewhat like that, where you can work on a set of documents at one time. Then once you have a set of IDs, you can get summary information. You can fetch detailed data records, or you can find related documents, either in the same database or in other databases. So the link endpoint, you can get related citations within PubMed, PubMed to PubMed, or you can get, say, find out which genes a particular study is linked to, or which proteins, or any number of things. It also has links to the full text versions of citations. The global query, or gQuery endpoint, allows you to run a query against every database, all 38, and find out how many rows match. So that could see that being useful in some cases. And you can also get spelling suggestions, and you can find citation matches. If you pass in a list of authors and a title, it'll say, I think this is the one you're looking for, and it'll match that up for you. All right, any questions on those? All right, we're going to focus on the search, summary, and link utilities. Those are most useful for our purposes here. So here's an example API request. It's just a regular HTTP GET request. I should say for those who are developers, it's not quite a RESTful API, but it's something you can work with. So by default, I think on all the endpoints you're going to get back XML by default. And so here's a search query where you can see on this the first line it has esearch.fcgi, so you just change that with different endpoints. And then the second one is query string, which we're going to the PubMed database, searching for the term cancer. And it's articles or citations that have been released or modified within the last 60 days. And we only want 2 of them because we're almost feeling lucky. So what you get back is some parameters describing your search, the count, whether you were using paging or starting at the 0th, the first result. Then you get your ID list back. That's basically all that you get back, except you also get some how PubMed interpreted your query. So you search for cancer, it said, you also mean neoplasms. Okay, so it tells you how it interpreted your query. Okay, so there's something hidden behind this for the developers here. There's actually a DTD that goes along, which is basically a way of describing that XML structure. So let's see here. If you look back here, we have a sort of hierarchy, right, to these elements. For those that aren't familiar with it, this is XML, which is a way of structuring data that computers can interpret easily. So there's another way of describing that structure, and that's called the DTD, or a document type definition, and you can get that for most of these endpoints, which may help you to understand and interpret the results. There's also, this is the summary endpoint, and here we're getting metadata on those 2 articles that we just did a search and had returned. So it's the PubMed database. This time we're doing return mode or ret mode JSON. JSON is another type of data transmission specification. Instead of XML, like we saw in the previous slide, this is something that's very similar to JavaScript arrays or objects. And it's faster for computers to interpret. So as a developer, if you see a JSON option, especially in the Drupal world, you're probably going for that. But it's not available on every endpoint. So you got to read the documentation to figure out which one you can use. And also, if you take this rep mode parameter and put it at the end of the query string, it doesn't work. It needs to be there. Implementation detail. Okay. So here we have some metadata about the citations, including authors, publication date, title, all the sort of stuff that you might want to display on your Drupal site. So we had to make 2 API calls, but now we've got some information to display on our Drupal site. Here's an example of the link API endpoint where we're searching for citations that are related to ID, 202, whatever. So the links are from PubMed, db from equals PubMed, to db equals PubMed. And at the end, you'll see there's command neighbor score. If you don't pass in the command neighbor score, you don't get the scores back. So you probably want the scores so that you can perhaps say, I only want stuff that's really relevant, a score above 50 million or something like that.
How do you determine these scores?
So these scores are determined by Entrez, by PubMed, and we don't get to see the implementation details of that, unfortunately. But it's what the researchers are already used to using, so it won't be unexpected, the quality of results that you get, I guess, and you don't have to implement it yourself. So we don't have to reinvent the wheel. But yeah, it is a little bit opaque. A black box, but it's probably does what you need it to do, right? Okay, so you get back a list of IDs. If we were looking in another database like proteins, there would be protein IDs, and then you'd go retrieve the details about, these matching citations with the summary utility, which we just saw. All right, so those are, your basic API requests. Any questions on those API requests before we go on? Not that interesting, but yeah. How often are the APIs?
Do you have an idea how many people are actually using it?
There's the man who knows. Maybe?
No, I mean, this is a global resource.
Yeah. So there's probably millions of researchers in the world, and almost all of them use a desktop reference citation manager, and those have integration that calls this API.
Oh, okay.
So I would say that this is a very busy API, yet it's very performant, because they have policies, which we're looking at now, about the behavior of using the API. So you can't make too many requests, and if you are going to make them, do it during certain times of the day. Otherwise, they will track you down and ban you. There's a way to register your tool ID, like I am the AlzPED site, that's your tool ID, AlzPED. And an email address, so if for some reason your code goes haywire and starts really hammering their API, they can get in touch with you and say you're, poorly behaved. Anyway, so in Drupal, there's a few considerations for how you could be well behaved. You could cache the data, so you don't request it every time. You keep a local copy, right? And then maybe you refresh it every now and then, just like a normal web browser does. Again, when you're making a Drupal module or something that others in the Drupal community are going to use, you want to make it configurable so that they can type in their own tool ID and email address. You obviously don't want to hard code your own because you don't have control over where your code is going to be used once you publish it on Drupal.org. So we're all good citizens. We're all good Drupalistas. All right, so now let's talk about use cases where we would use this. Maybe you all are thinking and you already have some use cases, so if I don't mention them, please remember them and we'll talk about them. My use cases that I've come up with come in like 3 basic categories. We want to make life easier for the users. So that might take the form of, welcome to my site. Now go away. No, you don't want to say that French phrase there. You want to say, stay here. I have useful stuff and you stay on my site, right? So you can use the PubMed API to bring that information into your site, keep them engaged, and don't, get them lost. You can make your search experience better because, you can either by searching PubMed directly or incorporating other metadata that you wouldn't otherwise have on your site. You could incorporate that and make it easier to search. And of course, for data entry, if you're collecting data from researchers or other users, if all they have to do is type in their PubMed API and then most of the form's already filled out, you're probably going to get more submissions, right? So there's also data quality issues. You could check whatever they're typing in and say, that doesn't make sense with what's in PubMed, right? All right, so we'll go through the use cases. How's the pace for everybody? Good so far? Cool. All right, we'll try to go through these relatively quickly. So citation resource library, is basically something where you can share what you're looking at, what articles you've been looking at. You could share it with your research team or even with the general public. At WebFirst, we made one for an organization of researchers that, they wanted to share like a sort of common list of citations that they all agreed were important, to their field, publish it online and stuff like that. So that's what we did for them. And one thing that you could do is import citations directly from PubMed. So again, this goes to making the data entry easier. You'll get more submissions, right, from all those researchers in your organization. You could also aid in searching for new literature. So in the case where you're in not an organization like that, but a group that's actively doing research, you got to conduct literature reviews, right, and say what's out there, what's relevant, to my research. A tool that integrates with PubMed API can say, hey, there's some new articles that popped up, and you don't have to go and manually do a search, right? And say, hey, you better look at this one. They might have scooped your research. No, probably not that, but maybe you have something else to cite. Okay, and of course, you don't want to make your users go to PubMed just to export a citation to their desktop citation manager if you don't have to, right? Keep them on your site. So you can do that, and there's actually a module that does most of this stuff, and it's called the biblio module in Drupal. Another use case would be showing related publications, like we've done on AlzPED. There's a screenshot of AlzPED here, so you can, list the titles and a link to PubMed, or maybe you import those citations directly onto your site and keep the user on your site and link to it there. But in the end, it's all driven by the PubMed API. Again, we talked about data entry and submission, pre-filling the form to make it easier to submit, or checking for spelling errors or other data quality issues. Taxonomy synchronization use case is specifically around those medical subject headings, the mesh terms. There may be other taxonomies available in PubMed. I'm not aware of them, but you could probably do it with proteins or any number of other things too. You want that sort of classification information on your Drupal site. The work's already been done. Let's use the hard work of the NLM and the rest of the community, and we won't reinvent the wheel. We can make our autocomplete smarter. So, for example, when you're typing in the search box on your site, you can offer suggestions, based on what the user's typing in, such as searching for matching mesh terms or something else. But if you're going to have people typing keystrokes and you're making an API request every time they do that, you might get banned, right? So you probably need to think carefully about how you structure that and implement that. Another interesting idea would be a sort of link between electronic medical records and, and literature or other resources. So I know one of the big things that they're doing here at NIH, is to try to get physicians more relevant clinical information, from recent studies that are related to the diagnosis they're working with, right? And so, you could integrate that into your EMR system, and pay boku bucks and have to worry about all the HIPAA stuff. Or you could just have that link out to a Drupal site that can talk to the PubMed API, can house maybe other institution-specific commentary. This is how we do this, whatever, link to other resources up to date. I don't know, all the other things physicians use. So that would be an interesting use case. And of course, there's other third-party services that I don't know how much they're used, but you could make a sort of PubMed hub where you search everything, you know, that all the things that integrate with PubMed. Of course, there's apps. If you put it in the middle of the screen, it's really sexy. So that's what I did here. Now we're back to boring. Apps, obviously we're talking mostly about mobile apps here, but you could integrate directly from the app. It could call the PubMed API, or it could call a Drupal API that's already driving your mobile app, which is, we're here at Drupal, right? That's one of the things that we do at WebFirst 2 is we make a Drupal site that drives a mobile API that you use in your app. So you already are calling your Drupal API. Then on the Drupal side, behind the scenes, it can talk to PubMed on behalf of the mobile application. And that also helps you to be a good citizen because then you can cache those requests and don't, hammer that PubMed API too much. All right, so how do we do all this in Drupal? Of course, the Drupal mantra is that there's a module for that. I should have put an asterisk there that says, yes, you have to evaluate all those modules and figure out which one is the best one, right? So that's what we'll do here. We searched for PubMed or Entrez on Drupal.org, including sandbox projects. If you're not a Drupal developer, you might not know that there's this, drop-down that you can, select, and then you can find stuff that's more experimental. So we got 2 of those in here. Searched GitHub and Google, of course. Only found 5 modules, but that's enough to have some overlap between them and what they do. And so, unfortunately, none provide a generic API. So there's no Drupal module that you could use from your new custom code, to make it easier for you to develop. Unfortunately, so that's something that we can look at in a minute. We talked about the biblio module. This is your citation library, and it includes support for importing by PubMed ID. However, you wouldn't know about it if you were just reading the documentation. You actually have to dig into the code or enable the module and play around with it and enable a submodule, and eventually you might find it. I think they pulled in one of these other related modules I've listed here and didn't tell anybody. It was like, shh. So the thing that it doesn't do that these other modules do, which again, Biblio is available for Drupal 7, but these other ones are not at the moment. These other modules can, use the batch API, which allows you to do a lot of imports without, timing out your web page, or do it updates via cron. So it'll check, has anything changed in the last 30 seconds? No, don't do that. In the last day or hour or whatever it is. The first one, the Entrez database import, also provides moderation of the imported citations. So you could import a bunch of citations and then go through them and say, actually, we don't want that one, kick it out. So those are the sort of citation library related modules. We're already through 3 of the 5. They're going by quickly. Here's one of the sandbox projects. This one is for Drupal 7, and is everybody here familiar with Drupal fields that you can attach to content types? Okay, so this is basically another field type that you can attach. So if you have a citation content type maybe, or a citation entity of some sort, you can attach this field, and when you're entering the citation, it says, what search do you want to run against PubMed? So like our earlier search we typed was cancer. You could type that in there. It's going to get back from PubMed a list of results, and it's going to call eSummary, get the titles, and then when your citation on your website is displayed, it's going to output the list of citation titles and links to PubMed. Very similar to what you saw on AlzPED, but this one's working with a query. It's not doing stuff that's actually related according to how PubMed works. It doesn't use the ELink endpoint, right? So we can't use that one for what we need to do. But it does have cron integration, and it's themable. Theming in Drupal allows you to customize the look and feel. So it's an interesting module and a good start. but it's, again, still in a sandbox. There's also a mesh auto import sandbox module. That's Drupal 7 as well. And you can retrieve the mesh terms that are associated with a given article via PubMed ID. So this is a little bit similar to that use case we talked about with synchronizing the mesh terms, right? This is on a citation by citation basis, but it would help you to, make it easier for users to search and find something. But unfortunately, this assigns the terms that it retrieves to a hard-coded field that it doesn't provide. You have to create it yourself, and there's other sort of sandboxy issues associated with this one. But it is a useful concept. And of course, you've seen the demo of the AlzPED related citations, also Drupal 7 uses ELink, like I said, instead of eSearch. And so the this is a custom module right now that's very specific to AlzPED. It stores the retrieved values in a multi-value link field, so a bunch of links which have a title and a URL. So it's a very Drupal-y solution, and it allows us to, since we're getting the scores back, it allows us to order them by similarity and cut off at a certain point. So there's other approaches that as a developer you could use. You might just want to treat the API, the PubMed API, as a generic API, right? Drupal has support for that too. So these web service client modules allow you to say, here's my API endpoint. It's blah 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 elink.fcgi. Here's the parameters that you can pass to it. So you specify all this ahead of time in configuration instead of writing this into your code, right? And so then you don't have to maintain the API client code in your module. You can rely on this other module, right, to do that. So it might save you a little bit of time, but it does introduce extra complexity, more modules. Might run just a touch slower, depending on how you're using it. But there's 3 modules that can do that for you. There's the web service client, web service clients, and the services client. And good luck telling them apart, but they do slightly different things. You'll have to, we're not going to go into those. You can read the comparison there and then try to figure out which one's best for you. And of course, we're running PHP, so there's other code out there. If you go on GitHub, there's some, generic PHP Entrez API clients. None of them, cover the whole thing though. So you're going to have to, alter it. It's really just a starting place, I would say. And maybe it'll offer some inspiration if we can make a one module to rule them all for Drupal Entrez integration. So I ran through a whole bunch of use cases, a whole bunch of modules, and we're already basically at the end here of the presentation. I have some next steps here, but before we get too far in that, I wanted to see if there was something I had discussed earlier that anybody wanted to go back to, any use case or any module or anything like that. All right, so we'll dive into the next steps. We can, obviously we want to work with the community so that we don't have similar modules doing similar things, in a sort of suboptimal way. So we can consolidate modules or maybe possibly use those web service client modules to make, that new consolidated module easier to maintain. And of course, there's nothing for Drupal 8, which is, going to be released any day now, really. Yeah. So, we should probably be getting something ready for that too. So that's it. Any questions?
You mentioned that you're AlzPED.
Yeah.
And it's also using Solar. Is that a part of what you're doing with PubMed, or are you keeping, importing collections and using Solar to do research?
Right. So most of the metadata, in this first release, all of the metadata has to be entered manually. We're not pulling in, any of the data from PubMed except the related publications. But that is, an enhancement that we've looked at for the future. And then all of that gets indexed by Solr and searched directly there. Yeah.
I'd like to know, though, is anyone using PubMed as a way to help them on the data entry side? Or can you talk a little bit about that?
Using instead of Drupal as a compilation system. But we maintain a lot of public-facing websites for NCI, and they like the bibliography search. So if they could tell us, if they give us their citations or PubMed IDs, just use it as a way to build our own database, and then we add, any of the user-defined fields to it, so that they can search front end like branch or
And all of that, you pull it from PubMed and you store it locally with some other additional user fields together locally on your site. Okay.
Yeah, actually, and since you mentioned Plone, the Python support for the Entrez API is much better developed than any PHP support out there. I think it's BioPy, yeah. Yep, so that didn't make it into the presentation, but I was like, if I start doing Python, then I should probably do all the languages, and then where do we stop? Yeah. Any other questions? All right.
You mentioned about mesh.
Yeah.
I know one thing we looked at was trying to, at one point, pull in the entire mesh and use it both for public navigation, like being able to search and drill down, but also using it on the data entry side.
Right.
But we eventually stepped away from it because it's so big and complex. I mean, the annual updates.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that is certainly, it's easy to put a use case up on the board and say, synchronize, magic, There is certainly some complexity there with synchronizing the mesh terms. But one of the databases that's available via the Entrez API is the list of mesh terms. So that's one of the 38. Yep.
Isn't the mesh terminology self-referential, like loops inside of there?
Yeah.
Is there a number of terms that will live underneath the multiple parent terms? How do you use that?
Right. Yeah, exactly. So Drupal taxonomies can support synonyms or related terms, and you can have additional fields that you add to a given taxonomy to track those relationships. If they're not
one parent term.
Yes. Yes.
Mesh allows more than one parent term.
Yes. Yes, but you could do that with additional fields.
Okay.
So there's probably a number of ways to skin that cat. But I think you saw it in the example query that I did on the search endpoint, where it returned the neoplasms, mesh terms, stuff like that. You can get more details about those relationships from the, if instead of querying PubMed, we were querying the mesh database. All right, last call for questions.
Also, just another general question for the audience. Does anyone use also the related citations, being able to ask PubMed, here's a PubMed ID, pull back the related citations, how do you use that? Okay.
You mean automatically
or either way, you just do the site, say, hey, you just sort of do the website itself and make use of the related citations to the one you're interested in, or programmatically pulling them out.
I used to do it through the interface only.
The interface.
But it's very helpful.
You found it helpful.
Yeah.
Okay.
Very good. All right, I do have a list of resources and links in the presentation, which I believe we'll be able to make available on the GovCon site, or you can always grab my card, and I'll be happy to send it to you directly. And I think all the links are on there, and that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Oh, well, we'll see.